There comes a time in every INFJ's journey when the noise of the world becomes unbearable, when the endless demands, shallow conversations, and constant misunderstandings weigh so heavily on the heart that the only refuge left is to step away, to retreat into the sanctuary of solitude, and in that retreat, something profound and terrifying takes shape, because for the INFJ, being alone is never simply about absence of people, it is about the presence of self. And it is in this space of chosen aloneness that their terrifying intelligence sharpens, deepens, and evolves into something so powerful that the world is both fascinated and unsettled by it. The importance of choosing to be alone cannot be overstated for INFJs, because solitude is not a punishment, it is not exile, it is not loneliness in the way the world defines it. It is medicine, it is clarity, it is survival, and most of all, it is the soil where the rare and terrifying intelligence of the INFJ grows its strongest roots, roots that reach deeper than anyone imagines, roots that make them unshakable. When an INFJ steps into solitude willingly, not as a victim of rejection but as a sovereign choice, they are reclaiming something the world constantly tries to take from them: their perspective, their voice, their energy, their sacred ability to think and feel without being drowned in the static of other people's expectations, and in this silence, they begin to see what no one else dares to see, to know what no one else dares to know, and to carry wisdom that others often find terrifying, not because it is cruel, but because it reveals truths too heavy for most to bear. And so today, we are diving into the depths of what really happens when INFJs choose to be alone, why that choice matters, why it is essential, and why it transforms them into beings of terrifying intelligence who cannot be manipulated, who cannot be owned, and who cannot be broken, no matter how much the world tries. 1. Silence as the forge of intelligence. For most people, silence is a void to be filled, an emptiness they run from with chatter, distraction, or noise. But for INFJs, silence is the forge where intelligence is sharpened, where intuition rises to the surface, and where their mind connects threads of meaning that others cannot even perceive, and it is in the conscious choice to embrace this silence, to sit in it without fear, that INFJs transform their solitude into a source of terrifying clarity. When the INFJ chooses to be alone, they are no longer being pulled in a dozen directions by other people's energies, emotions, and expectations, and suddenly the fog clears, the noise fades, and the whispers of their intuition become thunder inside their mind, guiding them toward insights that feel almost prophetic. This silence is not passive. It is active, alive, and deeply intentional, because in it the INFJ is replaying conversations, examining contradictions, sensing the undercurrents of human behavior that slipped past others in the moment, and in this way, their terrifying intelligence builds itself like fire shaping steel, slowly, steadily, and relentlessly. This is why the INFJ's silence is so unsettling to others. People expect quick reactions, predictable responses, and visible emotions, but INFJs withdraw into themselves, choose solitude, and let their mind work beneath the surface, and when they emerge, they do so with truths that others cannot deny, truths that cut through illusions like a blade, truths that terrify because they reveal what people were desperate to keep hidden. 2. The choice that breaks manipulation. Manipulation thrives on dependency. It thrives when people are afraid of being alone, when they crave validation, when they would rather cling to lies than risk solitude. But INFJs who choose to be alone dismantle this power structure entirely, because solitude becomes the shield that makes them untouchable. When the INFJ retreats into aloneness, they are stepping outside of the manipulator's arena. They are no longer pressured by the moment, no longer swayed by emotional coercion, no longer clouded by groupthink, and in this sacred separation, they review every word, every gesture, every hidden intention, and the terrifying intelligence of their pattern recognition awakens. They see the manipulation for what it is. They sense the strings being pulled. They notice where someone tried to sow guilt, fear, or dependency, and once they see it, the spell is broken. And when they return, they are no longer vulnerable, no longer willing to play the game, and this terrifies manipulators because the one weapon they rely on, dependency, no longer works on the INFJ who has chosen solitude. This is why it is so important for INFJs to choose aloneness. Without it, the weight of manipulation can seep in unnoticed, draining them, twisting their empathy into weakness, but with it, they become sovereign, they reclaim their power, and they realize that solitude is not isolation, it is freedom. 3. Solitude as the teacher of self-mastery. One of the most terrifying forms of intelligence that grows in INFJs who choose to be alone is self-mastery, because solitude forces them to face themselves, their shadows, their wounds, and their truths, and instead of running from them, they learn to integrate them. While many people surround themselves with noise to avoid facing their inner pain, INFJs often choose solitude because they know there is no growth without confrontation, and in that sacred space, they examine the deepest parts of themselves with brutal honesty, unraveling old wounds, re-examining past betrayals, and transforming their pain into wisdom. This process is terrifying to others because it produces a person who is no longer driven by denial, no longer shackled by unhealed wounds, and no longer vulnerable to the same tactics that keep others enslaved. The INFJ who has chosen to master themselves in solitude is a force beyond comprehension, because their terrifying intelligence is no longer just about seeing others. It is about seeing themselves with the same depth and clarity, and from that foundation, no external storm can shake them. This is why INFJs who embrace solitude radiate an aura of calm strength that unsettles people. They cannot be baited into pointless drama. They cannot be broken by petty insults. They cannot be manipulated through their fears, because they have faced their fears in solitude, and they have emerged unafraid. 4. Pattern recognition in the stillness. Perhaps the most unnerving aspect of INFJ intelligence is their ability to see patterns, and this ability multiplies in solitude, because only when they are away from the constant interference of social noise can they truly follow the threads of meaning that run through human behavior, history, and emotion. Most people experience life as a series of disconnected events, but INFJs, in their stillness, begin to see how each moment links to the next, how small inconsistencies reveal hidden truths, how behaviors repeat in cycles, and how these cycles reveal where people, relationships, or even entire systems are headed. This is why INFJs often predict outcomes long before others, why they see the cracks forming beneath the surface, why they know betrayal is coming before a single word is spoken, and why their warnings are often dismissed, until time proves them right. This level of pattern recognition is terrifying because it feels like foresight. People do not understand how INFJs can know so much, but the truth is simple. Solitude gives them the time and clarity to connect dots that others ignore, to hold information in a vast web of meaning, and to follow that web to conclusions that are both undeniable and unsettling. 5. The dangerous independence of choosing solitude. The importance of choosing solitude for INFJs cannot be overstated, because it breeds a kind of independence that terrifies those who rely on control, validation, and conformity to keep people in line. Most people fear being alone. They equate solitude with rejection, abandonment, or failure, but INFJs who willingly choose to be alone transform solitude into strength, because they no longer fear being left, they no longer crave constant validation, and they no longer need permission to exist as they are. This independence is terrifying because it makes the INFJ uncontrollable. They are not chained to the fear of abandonment. They are not manipulated by flattery. They are not desperate for attention. And this makes them immune to many of the tactics that the world uses to control others. When an INFJ chooses solitude, they are declaring to the world, "I do not need you to define me. I do not need your approval to exist. I can walk alone, and I will still thrive." And this declaration, spoken not in words but in the way they live, shakes people at their core, because most cannot imagine having that level of self-sufficiency. This is why INFJs who choose solitude are both feared and respected. They radiate a strength that others cannot comprehend, a terrifying intelligence that comes not from arrogance but from the simple, undeniable truth that they have faced the emptiness others run from, and they have made it their home. 6. The creative power of solitude. For the INFJ, solitude is not emptiness, it is possibility, and one of the most terrifying forms of their intelligence emerges in the creative landscapes they build when no one is watching, because unlike others who only create when inspired by external validation, INFJs create from the depths of silence, from the intensity of their own thoughts, from the whispers of their intuition, and from the endless stories they carry inside their hearts. When the INFJ chooses to be alone, the noise of expectation falls away, and what remains is a blank canvas, not just for art, but for ideas, for visions of the future, for solutions to problems that others cannot solve, and it is in this quiet space that their terrifying intelligence begins to generate ideas that are not merely clever but transformative. The world often underestimates the INFJ because they do not always show their brilliance outwardly, they do not shout it, they do not flaunt it, but in solitude, their mind is alive with blueprints for change, with creative strategies, with visions that are so far ahead of their time that others often only understand them years later. This creative intelligence is terrifying because it is not superficial. It does not chase trends, it does not bow to shallow approval, it builds things of depth, of meaning, of permanence, and when these creations finally surface, they often strike others with the force of revelation. How did they know? How did they see this coming? How did they create something that speaks to the soul? And the answer is always the same. Solitude gave them the space to listen, to imagine, to create without limits. This is why INFJs must choose solitude, because without it, their creativity suffocates under the weight of shallow chatter and external noise, but with it, their terrifying intelligence births visions that the world secretly needs, even if it fears them. 7. Solitude as a mirror to humanity. Another terrifying dimension of INFJ intelligence sharpened in solitude is their uncanny ability to hold a mirror to humanity, to reflect back not only what is seen but what is hidden, not only what is spoken but what is suppressed, and this ability is cultivated in their chosen aloneness where they observe, analyze, and process without distraction. When INFJs step away from people, they are not abandoning humanity, they are studying it. Alone, they replay the patterns of interactions, they sit with the contradictions, they sense the collective fears and desires that ripple through society, and they develop a mirror so precise that when they hold it up, people are often stunned by the accuracy of the reflection. This mirror is not always welcomed. People claim they want truth, but when confronted with the truth of themselves, their hypocrisy, their denial, their unresolved wounds, they recoil, they resist, they even lash out at the INFJ, because being seen at that depth feels like exposure, like vulnerability, like being stripped bare. But the INFJ does not build this mirror to harm. They build it because their terrifying intelligence compels them to reveal what is real, because they understand that without truth, there can be no growth, no healing, no evolution. The importance of choosing solitude here is critical. Without it, the INFJ is too entangled in the emotions of others, too weighed down by constant interaction to hold the mirror steady. But with solitude, they regain clarity, and when they return, they reflect back truths with such piercing accuracy that people cannot ignore them, even if they try. This is terrifying, because the INFJ does not simply tell people who they are, they show them, and in a world built on masks, this is one of the most unsettling forms of intelligence there is. 8. The moral compass strengthened in solitude. For INFJs, solitude is not only a space of thought but also a sanctuary where their moral compass recalibrates, because in a world that constantly pressures people to conform, to compromise, to silence their values for acceptance, the INFJ withdraws and remembers who they are, and in this remembering, their terrifying intelligence gains the edge of conviction. When surrounded by others, INFJs often sense the subtle pressures to bend, to go along with the group, to silence their discomfort for the sake of peace, but when they choose solitude, they strip away these influences and listen to the voice of their conscience, that quiet but unrelenting guide that tells them what is right, what is just, what is aligned with their deepest principles. And here lies the terrifying part. An INFJ who has strengthened their moral compass in solitude becomes unshakable, because they are no longer negotiating with themselves, no longer wondering if their perception is valid, no longer seeking permission to stand for what they know is true. This moral clarity terrifies others because it cannot be bought, cannot be twisted, and cannot be silenced by social pressure. It radiates with an authority that is difficult to argue against, and it exposes the moral compromises others are willing to make. The importance of solitude in this process is undeniable. Without it, INFJs risk being swayed, drained, or silenced by external pressure. With it, they stand rooted in their values, unafraid of rejection, unafraid of standing alone, and it is in this aloneness that their terrifying intelligence transforms into moral authority, the kind of authority that reshapes not just their own lives but the lives of those they influence. 9. The prophetic edge of INFJ intuition. If there is one aspect of INFJ intelligence that others find most terrifying, it is their intuition, and this intuition grows razor-sharp in solitude, because only in the quiet can they fully hear it, only in the silence can they trace its threads to their source, only in the absence of noise can they see the future forming in the present. When INFJs choose to be alone, they allow themselves to follow the whispers of intuition that often get drowned out in the chaos of daily life. They see where patterns are leading, they sense outcomes before they unfold, they feel the tremors of change long before the earthquake hits. People often dismiss INFJs as too sensitive, too dreamy, or too intense, but time and again, the INFJ's predictions prove true, not because of mystical magic, but because of terrifying intelligence rooted in deep perception, emotional radar, and the ability to hold vast patterns in their mind until the truth becomes undeniable. This prophetic edge terrifies people because it exposes what they are not ready to admit. An INFJ may gently warn of betrayal, of collapse, of consequences, and people resist, until it happens, exactly as foreseen. And then the fear sets in. How did they know? How did they see what no one else saw? The answer is simple: solitude. Solitude gave them the silence to listen, to connect, to trust the intuition that most people bury. And when they return from solitude, they carry insights that feel like prophecy, and prophecy always unsettles those who live in denial of truth. 10. The transformation of pain into wisdom. The last, and perhaps most terrifying, form of intelligence cultivated in INFJs who choose solitude is their ability to transform pain into wisdom, because solitude does not only bring peace, it also brings confrontation with wounds, with memories, with suffering that cannot be ignored, and instead of running, INFJs face it, they sit with it, they dissect it, and they eventually turn it into something sacred. Most people run from pain. They numb it, distract from it, or project it onto others, but INFJs in solitude process it differently. They ask, what is this pain teaching me? What pattern does it reveal? What truth lies beneath it? And in doing so, they transform their suffering into insight, empathy, and unshakable resilience. This ability is terrifying because it produces individuals who cannot be destroyed by hardship. Betrayal does not break them, it teaches them. Rejection does not define them, it frees them. Loss does not erase them, it deepens them. And when they emerge from solitude, they carry wisdom forged from fire, wisdom that feels ancient, wisdom that unsettles because it cannot be shaken. The importance of solitude here is absolute. Without it, pain festers into bitterness. With it, Pain transforms into wisdom, into terrifying intelligence that sees not only what happened, but why it happened, and what it means for the future. This is why INFJs who choose solitude radiate such depth, because they have faced storms alone and turned those storms into maps for others to navigate. Their terrifying intelligence is not just about seeing, it is about surviving, transforming, and teaching. 11. The INFJ alone sees the invisible strings that hold people together. When the INFJ chooses solitude, they begin to see something that is almost impossible to detect in the chaos of constant interaction. The invisible web that connects human beings. The subtle micro-expressions. The way words carry unspoken tension. The hidden weight in a sentence. The double meaning in a half smile. You see, INFJs are not simply people who notice things. They are people who connect things, and this is what terrifies others. An INFJ who is constantly surrounded by noise may sense fragments, little shards of meaning here and there, but an INFJ who has chosen to step away, to be alone, can sit in that silence and map out the entire psychological blueprint of a situation. It's like watching a chessboard from above, seeing every piece, every hidden strategy, every quiet alliance. The INFJ doesn't just hear what people say. They feel the undercurrents, the suppressed truths, the emotions someone is fighting to hide. This is why, when INFJs return from periods of solitude, people feel disarmed around them. It feels as though the INFJ is staring straight through the mask, right into the trembling core beneath. And this ability is not surface-level intuition, it is terrifying in its accuracy, because solitude sharpens it. While others drown in distractions, INFJs who spend time alone notice how every small gesture reveals something profound. A shifting gaze becomes evidence of shame. A nervous laugh becomes a cry for validation. A seemingly confident boast transforms into a silent plea for someone to finally notice how exhausted a person really is. The terrifying part? INFJs rarely speak these truths aloud. They keep them, catalog them, and use them only when necessary. But make no mistake, when an INFJ has spent enough time in solitude, they return to the world able to see the invisible strings that hold relationships, families, friendships, and entire communities together, and they can also see where those strings are about to snap. 12. Solitude turns the INFJ into a master strategist of the soul. If you want to understand the terrifying power of an INFJ alone, imagine a strategist who doesn't plan for battles with swords and armies, but for battles of hearts, minds, and identities. Most people plan their lives reactively. They respond to what happens in the moment. But INFJs, when they choose solitude, can pull themselves out of the immediacy of the present and envision an entire timeline. They see how a choice today ripples into 5 years from now, how a careless word today might be the seed of a broken bond tomorrow, how neglecting one small part of their identity now could bloom into regret decades later. The solitude gives them distance, and distance gives them clarity. It is in this clarity that INFJs become terrifying. Because they don't just plan their own lives with strategy, they begin to understand the lives of others with the same depth. They know how people's hidden wounds might direct their choices, how suppressed insecurities might lead them into self-sabotage, how unacknowledged dreams might lead them into affairs, addictions, or quiet despair. And here's where it becomes haunting. INFJs often predict outcomes long before others even realize they're walking into them. They can warn someone gently, but if ignored, the INFJ watches it unfold exactly as they foresaw. This is why people often accuse INFJs of being too intense, or worse, controlling. But the truth is simpler. Solitude has honed the INFJ's vision of cause and effect, and they cannot unsee the inevitable. While others stumble blindly into emotional traps, the INFJ strategist has already mapped them out. And yet, because they are not motivated by dominance, they rarely use this intelligence to control. Instead, they withdraw, carrying the burden of knowing what others refuse to admit. 13. Solitude makes the INFJ's emotional depth terrifyingly unshakable. Another aspect of INFJ intelligence that becomes terrifying in solitude is their emotional resilience. Most people fear being alone because it forces them to face themselves, to sit in silence with their unhealed wounds, their regrets, their self-doubt. But INFJs? They already live with that depth every day, so solitude doesn't break them, it forges them. When an INFJ has chosen solitude, they dive headfirst into the darkest waters of their psyche. They relive betrayals. They revisit their deepest fears. They sit with their sadness until it transforms into wisdom. This is why, when they emerge, they carry an aura that unsettles people, because they have already faced what most people spend their entire lives running from. Their intelligence becomes terrifying because it is paired with unshakable emotional grounding. Others may crumble in the face of manipulation, heartbreak, or rejection, but an INFJ who has lived alone with their thoughts has already processed those storms. They've already died 1,000 small deaths in the privacy of their solitude, which means when life throws chaos at them, they do not collapse. They remain standing, silent, steady, and piercingly aware. It is terrifying to interact with someone who cannot be emotionally manipulated. Terrifying to argue with someone who already knows their own triggers and cannot be baited. Terrifying to try to control someone who has sat in silence for years and built an inner kingdom no one can penetrate. This is the kind of terrifying emotional sovereignty that solitude grants the INFJ, and it is why people sense something untouchable about them, something that can't be conquered. 14. In solitude, the INFJ learns the art of walking away without regret. Perhaps the most terrifying thing about INFJs who choose to be alone is this: they learn the art of walking away. In solitude, INFJs realize something that most people never dare to confront, that attachment can be a chain, and love without respect is poison. They learn that peace is worth more than belonging, that truth is worth more than harmony, that self-respect is worth more than approval. And when an INFJ has learned this, when they have lived alone long enough to know their worth in its purest form, they no longer cling. They no longer beg people to stay. They no longer compromise their soul just to be accepted. They walk away. And they do so without regret, because solitude has taught them something that terrifies the world. Being alone does not scare them. In fact, being alone has become their strength. This is why people who hurt an INFJ often feel a haunting emptiness when the INFJ leaves. Because the INFJ doesn't just leave physically, they withdraw their terrifying intelligence, their insight, their quiet presence that once understood everything about you without you even needing to explain. And that loss feels unbearable. To walk away without regret is the final weapon of the INFJ who has chosen solitude. It is the clearest expression of their terrifying intelligence. To know when something is over, to know when to protect their own soul, and to do it without looking back. So here we are, at the end of this journey into the terrifying intelligence of INFJs who choose to be alone. And perhaps now you understand why the world feels unsettled by them. It is not just their ability to read people. It is not just their ability to strategize the soul, to connect invisible patterns, to remain emotionally unshakable. It is not even their ability to walk away. It is all of it, fused together in the crucible of solitude. INFJs who choose to be alone transform into something rare. Individuals who are no longer dependent on the illusions of society, who see through the masks of others, who live from a place of depth that most people will never reach. This is terrifying not because it is dark, but because it is free. Free from manipulation. Free from fear. Free from the endless games people play just to avoid themselves. And maybe you, as an INFJ, have felt this power stirring within you. Maybe you've wondered if choosing solitude makes you broken, unlovable, strange. But I want you to know, it doesn't. It makes you whole. It makes you dangerous. It makes you exactly who you were meant to be. Because in your solitude, you discover that the world cannot define you, and that realization is the most terrifying intelligence of all.